thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I want to thank Tewksbury Telemedia, who is recording this event, and you can catch it on their TV station, Comcast and Verizon, or on their YouTube channel. So look for that later in the week. But we want to thank everyone for coming. We want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Public Library for sponsoring this afternoon's program and sponsoring all our programs here at the library for adults, teens, and kids. We're a very active programming library. We run one, sometimes two programs a day for adults here. Okay? If anyone has any cell phones on them, they want to turn those to vibrate or silent. The restrooms are down the hall on the right before you get to the front desk, and you can anticipate the program lasting approximately an hour. Okay? All right. So, we're all here to take a virtual vacation across Europe. Join teachers David and Nancy Dillon as they share slides and stories from one of their latest travel excursions to Europe, where they visited popular and little-known parts of England, France, and Italy. The Dillons travel extensively. They traveled more than 20 times to Europe. Okay? I've traveled like 20 times in my life to New Hampshire, so this is really So they traveled more than 20 times to Europe, and they're eager to share their experiences with fellow travel enthusiasts. Nancy is a 4th grade teacher at the Thoreau School in Concord. I got that, okay. And David is a middle school social studies teacher in Lancaster. So I'm so grateful during school vacation week they were able to join us. So let's give them a big round of applause.
So you're all very welcome, folks. We're very excited to be here, and it's wonderful to see such an enthusiastic turnout. We want to thank Robert and the library for extending this invitation to us. Robert is probably too modest about his travel experience. Even though we've been to Europe many, many times, I don't think I've been to New Hampshire once in all my years. So I've got to get out and about more throughout New England, I suppose. So anyway, without any further delay, Nancy's going to start the program. This actually, to be perfectly candid, this is a trip that we took about 2 years ago. It was the summer of 2017. So, but everything is very timely and very relevant. We think we have an exciting lineup of European destinations to show you. And we always have a marvelous time traveling to Europe. We typically travel for 3 weeks, and because we're teachers, we're sort of locked into the month of August, which is what they call, travel agents call the high season. And that has its advantages and disadvantages, and we could certainly talk about that as our program unfolds. But I'll let Nancy start. She's going to give you an overview of the trip, and then she'll begin.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. We are completely independent travelers. We do all of our own research, book all of our own hotels, all of our own side tours, things like that. So I'll show you a little bit about where we traveled to. So we started off in Northumberland, which is in the northern part of England on the Scottish border. And from Northumberland, we traveled down to Yorkshire, and we stayed in the town of Whitby on the Yorkshire coast. From there, we took a train to London, and from London, we went to Lyon, or the Dordogne region of France, which is a storybook village section, then to Lyon. From Lyon, we took a train to Milan and went to Lake Como and spent some time there, and then to Milan. So we'll start you off with our journey in Northumberland. So Northumberland is really an area of rolling hills, and it's very rugged. We had never been there before. We saw very few American tourists there. It was really beautiful. And this shows you some of the beautiful hillside there. We stayed in the village of Wark at a hotel called Hotel Battlesteads. And when we book hotels, we do have a budget. This one was about $150 a night, and we had an ensuite room that came with a balcony. And they had a lot of gardens out in the back. The chef here told us that in this particular hotel was famous because Robert Burns had once stayed there after giving a talk in Newcastle. And this shows the luncheon that we had. It was just a really charming hotel. This was our room, and we had a balcony and a huge bathroom with it. And then all around the hotel are some of the beautiful walkways that take us down to the small village. Just nearby is, this is Hexham Abbey, and a kind steward really gave us a tour of the church, and he pointed out to us how a lot of the churches in England are built actually from Roman stone, because antiquities weren't really valued as much back in the early 13th, 14th centuries. So we got to have a tour down below where we saw the original foundation of the church. And then behind the church was an outdoor market. This is Hadrian's Wall, and I have to admit I didn't really know the history of Hadrian's Wall at all until I went there. David did, because he's a history teacher, but it's really a spectacular World Heritage Site. And it runs for almost 80 miles from sea to sea across northern England in some of the most wildest, dramatic countryside. Hadrian's Wall dates back to the 12th century, and when Hadrian ordered his army to build the wall. And 15,000 men built the wall in under 6 years, which was really quite a feat. And driving back to our hotel, we came across a site called Caulfield's Quarry, which was part of Hadrian's Wall. And it had once been a quarry, and as a result, it was destroyed over time, but a tiny bit remains. So we were able to climb up the steps and visit part of the wall. About 20 minutes away from the hotel is a place called Housesteads, and it's the ruins of an ancient Roman fort built before Hadrian's Wall. And another place that we went to visit was called Beamish. And it's a folk town, and it's known as a living museum in the north. It covers about 300 acres, and it's divided into 4 different time periods. Our favorite part of the folk park was actually a 1900s town with stores and businesses from that particular time period. And to get there, people would hop on all different kinds of vintage transportation, trolleys and little buses. And everywhere you would see people dressed in period costume. You could buy things in old-fashioned stores that were designed to look like long ago. Or they had a blacksmith, and children could sign up and make different things such as a horseshoe or iron hooks. They even had a replica of an old passenger train pulled by a steam-operated engine, and it was really interesting. We hopped aboard, we waited, and then all that happened is we went probably about 100 feet, and then the train turned around and came back, and so that was your ride. And you can see the men there putting in the coal. Our next stop was on the Yorkshire coast, and it was in the seaside town of Whitby. It's in North Yorkshire, and it's about a 2-hour drive from our accommodation that we stayed in Northumberland. It really had a fun seaside vibe. It had arcades for the kids, it had kids jumping into the harbor, it had fishing boats, it had fish and chips. This is our hotel. We stayed at the Angel Hotel. Again, it was under $150 a night, which included breakfast. And this was something new that we weren't familiar with. This is crabbing. It's an activity for the kids. They fill a net with bacon or fish, and then they drop it into the water and pull up little crabs. And then they don't keep the crabs, they gently let them go back. So this was a huge activity there. This is Castle Howard, and it's an elegant stone manor house built in 1699, and it's remained in the Howard family ever since then. Although the family still lives there in one of the wings, you can go and tour some of the rooms. The Howard family has really traveled extensively throughout the world, and all of their paintings and artifacts were tastefully displayed. This is their library and some of the photos. Castle Howard was featured in the 1981 miniseries Brideshead Revisited, starring Jeremy Irons. And then again in the 2008 feature film. Outside, you can see the immaculately maintained gardens and the fountains. And some of the photo ops. Just really beautiful flowers. This is the village of Thirsk. And here you can find something that I had been wanting to do for ages, and that's to go to see the world of James Herriot. I've read all of his books several times. I've seen every episode of his BBC series, so I was really excited to go to this museum. And inside the museum, they had the children's versions of his books, which I use a lot with my 4th grade class. We got to tour the house, we got to see the surgery, and we got to see a recreation of the BBC set. And I really loved every minute of this particular tour. Everywhere you could really feel his love for all of the animals. This is the popular seaside town in Yorkshire of Scarborough, and this is the Grand Hotel. It was built in the 1800s, and it was actually at its time, in its glory days, it was the largest hotel, I believe, in the world. Today, it's filled most nights, but sadly, it's fallen into really bad disrepair. And it's just mostly used for budget holidays. But this is a view from the balcony of the hotel, so it really is beautifully situated. Next, we went to an area called Robin Hood's Bay. To get to the waterfront, you follow a steep winding road through a pretty seaside village. Arriving down at the beach, we walked out onto a rocky shelf where people tend to go there and look for fossils. And then these next two photos show the Yorkshire countryside. This is Revo Abbey. I was amazed that there was something this big out in the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire. It was built in 1132, and over time, 500 people actually lived there. The abbey was closed in 1538, and over hundreds of years, it's crumbled apart. And then these are some photos back at Whitby when we would walk around in the evening. And this is Whitby Abbey, which was high above the town. We were actually too late there to visit it, but it was beautiful just to walk around outside. So traveling by train in England can be very, very expensive. We have actually paid hundreds of dollars for the two of us to travel from one point to another. And about 2 years ago, someone in a B&B said, did you know if you go online and book in advance, you could pay $50? And so we paid $70 from Yorkshire for two of us to travel first class, including a meal, from Yorkshire into London on a high-speed train. And David's going to talk to you about it.
So one thing we should mention, folks, should you folks have any questions at all or any type of comments during the show, don't be shy about raising your hand.
What you should know is there's 2 duplicate pages for everyone.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So, as I mentioned, please don't be shy if you have any comments or any questions as we go through the slides. So one of the things, we're looking at a picture now of downtown London. I remember when I look at this picture, it reminds me of the American travel writer Rick Steves, who said the first time he went to London, he felt very, very small. And it's so true. When you go from a place like Northumberland in the northern part of England to London, this city can make you feel very, very small. But it's a very vibrant, it's a tremendously fascinating, endlessly fascinating city that is just probably has maybe the greatest amount of riches, cultural riches of any city that we've visited in Europe. So let me bring you through London. We stayed at this hotel. This is a Spanish chain called the NH chain. It's a Spanish, we've grown very fond of this chain of hotels. We've stayed at several of them throughout Europe and we enjoy them very much. This one is beautifully situated in an area of London called Kensington. So it's very close to a subway stop. And it also has, it's in a nice neighborhood that's very, very safe, very vibrant with a lot of nice eateries as well. So we've stayed there now, I think at least twice, am I right, Nancy? We've been there twice and we plan, when we go to London again this coming summer, we plan to stay here for the 3rd time. So this is a very nice chain of hotels and we've stayed at others throughout Europe as well. This is the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now this is located just maybe a 10-minute walk from the hotel that we just showed you. And this is one of my favorite museums in all of Europe. It's a decorative arts museum, and it's a museum that is just filled with beauty. Wherever you turn, there's just beauty all around you. And it's a free museum. You could literally spend an entire week in here and not see everything. It's probably one of the most extensive museums of its kind in the world, and it's just a glorious museum. And I think we'll have a few shots in here to show you. They built, if you go back to this is the original. This dates from the Victorian period in probably, I think, mid-19th century. They built a new entranceway that is very, very much 21st century. And one of the pleasures of going to the Victoria and Albert Museum is that you have people of all ages go there and they can take a break from museum hopping to enjoy a lunch or a coffee, and they have some really charming man-made ponds here that children can splash about in. So it's great fun. Sometimes you'll have people not even go into the museum. Locals, Londoners will go there and bring their family and spend an afternoon there. So it's really nice. It's not just populated by tourists. This is the interior of the museum. And as I mentioned, this is very characteristic of what you see in the museum. There are statues, there is all types of porcelain, pottery. It's just really a beautiful place just to kind of escape from the intensity of the city and enjoy some beautiful works of art. Here's just a few examples of some of the art that's on display. Now, one of the things they do have, one of my favorite parts of the Victoria and Albert Museum is, if you want to see the original, of course, you have to go to Italy to see Michelangelo's David. But they do have a room of seconds. So these are copies, and this was during a time in the 19th century where most Europeans couldn't afford to go to the European continent, and if they wanted to see some of the great works of art, they could actually they wouldn't have to travel to Italy, they could actually see exact replicas of these great works of art, such as Michelangelo's David, that you'd have to go to Florence, and most people couldn't afford to go to Florence 150 years ago, so they could enjoy these beautiful copies, and there's an entire room that's just dedicated to seconds, so to speak. And I enjoyed this tremendously, because even though Nancy and I have been very fortunate to see many of the originals, it's always wonderful to see some really impressive copies of these magnificent works of art. And you can see how David just towers. If any of you have been to Florence and seen the original, it very much is like that, where you just, tourists looking at Michelangelo's David is just, it's just stunning. Yes?
Is it the same size?
It's the exact same size. So these according to what I've read about this room, is these are all done exact in terms of size, dimensions are identical to the originals.
I saw David last year.
Yeah, you were in Florence last summer?
Last spring.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice, yeah. So it's great fun to be able to compare and contrast as you walk in. They've got them all kind of in one large room. Here's another one. This is, of course, this is Michelangelo's Moses, if I remember correctly. This is another one of his great pieces of sculpture. Of course, what's really fun about, I referenced a few minutes ago, mistakenly called the subway, the London subway. Of course, it's the Underground. And it's a terrific way to travel relatively inexpensively if you're in the city. London is a big city. It's a lot of the sites are very closely situated, but there are some that are on the outskirts of the city, and you'll want to make good use of the subway. Fortunately, London does have a superb underground, and you just have to remember to mind the gap while you're there. Yeah. Sorry about that joke. I thought that could boost our ratings on cable TV a bit. Try to weave in a little comedy here. All right, I just have to work on not hitting the mic. My goodness. So that's a fun way to travel, though. And London is renowned for its theaters, so you can really take advantage of going to some. London is considered a world-class theater, a city of theater, live performances, and that remains true. And you can get some really good bargains if you shop around for matinee shows, some really, Broadway quality performances at non-Broadway prices in London. So it's a great theater town if you enjoy theater. Now this is just an example. I hope Nancy will help me out here if I can find my notes. Oh, this is the Courtauld Gallery, I believe. And this is one of the things that's interesting about London that I would mention to you folks. If you do go to London, or even if you've been, London has so many cultural riches. This is one of them. It's a very relatively unknown art gallery. It's in a beautifully situated courtyard with some glorious architecture. And what's fun for me and Nancy about touring London is, yeah, you want to hit the biggies, the Tower of London, the London Eye and what have you. But at the same time, there's some marvelous art galleries if you enjoy beautiful art in a more intimate setting. So this is one example of that. And I had some fun that day just snapping photographs of some tourists trying to dodge their way through the fountains. Here's some examples of some of the artwork that's at the Courtauld Gallery. This is a Rembrandt, or actually this I believe is a Frans Hals, who was a very famous portrait artist from the Netherlands during Holland's Golden Age. And here's some of the artwork that's on display at the Courtauld. One of the things that you'll also enjoy is just going pub hopping. That's great fun. That's a great tradition in London. And we enjoyed that as well. And there was a time where London, I think it's fair to say, when I was a boy, England and London in particular didn't have a very good reputation in terms of dining, but I think that has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 20 years. You can have there's superb restaurants of all different ethnicities, and London is actually a great place to go dining today. It's the days of just overcooked food in London that's really long gone. Buskers are very popular in London. Many of them, are not quite ready for prime time, but many of them are very good. A lot of these folks that you see busking and doing live performance for the tourists, these people are licensed. They have to go through a process where they have to be approved by a local board, and many of these people are very talented, and that's another part of the fun of going to a great city like London. This is one of our favorite shops. It's called Fortnum & Mason. Fortnum & Mason is it's kind of a little bit too rich for our pockets. It's a very upscale shopping, but it has a grand tradition in London. It's really a great spot to go, and just to maybe make your friends envious, go into Fortnum & Mason. It's not far from Piccadilly Square. It's an easy walk from Piccadilly, and it's great to go in there, and everything is very pricey in there, but you shouldn't go in there underdressed. You have to be careful. One of the times I went in there with a pair of shorts on, and I felt underdressed, even during high season. Everybody, all the people who work there, the employees are all crisply attired, and it's got a certain pretense about it, but the products are excellent, and it's quite kind of a quiet elegance about it. Here's a close-up of the clocks. And this is what Fortnum & Mason, this gives you an idea of what it looks like on the inside. It's very popular with tourists. But another one of our favorite shops, Nancy and I are very big fans of this retail, a woman named Kath Kitson. She has a very distinctive style about her, and every time we go to a major city in England, we'll seek out Kath Kitson's. There's one in Bath, there's one in Liverpool. So she's done really well for herself, but it's really a charming retail store with some it's not inexpensive, but it's not quite as expensive as Fortnum & Mason. But we always go in there and buy things for our friends and our relatives and bring back. It always makes for distinctive gift giving. And she always has really wonderful displays. This company does such a marvelous job. I'm not much of a shopper, frankly, but I have to say, every time we go to England, we seek out these retail outlets, and it's great fun because it always brings a smile to my face because she's very cheerful. Has a really nice positive vibe about it. One of the things that I would strongly recommend if you do go to London is to go to the National Portrait Gallery. The National Portrait Gallery is located right in downtown London. It's a wonderful place. It's His Queen Elizabeth. This is just portraits of very famous British, noteworthy British people, and it's just dedicated to great portrait art. This is St. Martin in the Fields. St. Martin in the Fields is a wonderful place to go if you'd like to go for some classical music and an afternoon concert. It's located right around the corner from the National Portrait Gallery. And this is an example of just walking around London during the evening. You can see Big Ben. Today, if you go to London today, Big Ben unfortunately they're dealing with scaffolding right now. So Big Ben is sort of out of commission for a while. We were fortunate to be there when we could still get nice views of it. This is one of the great art galleries of Europe. It's the Britain's National Gallery. It's a magnificent place. You could spend a lot of time there. And this is one of my favorite museums in the world. This is the British Museum. The British Museum is probably right up there with the Louvre in Paris. If you have any interest at all in ancient history, as I do, I'm fortunate enough to teach ancient history. This has a marvelous collection from ancient Egypt, Greek, and Roman. It's a beautiful, and everything is just done in such a cutting edge, presented impeccably. This is part of the Egyptian collection. This is a partial bust of Ramses II. Of course, Britain was, along with other European powers, France, Germany, was very aggressive in terms of archaeological finds in places like Egypt. This is just a view of the people looking up at the Ramses. This is a very popular place for tourists. And here's some examples of the Egyptian artifacts that are on display. It's a marvelous collection. From what I've gathered, they probably have the second most impressive collection of Egyptian artifacts, second only to the National Museum in Cairo. Here's another view of the British Museum, and it's really a very airy, a lovely interior. This is the Assyrian collection. So you have an extensive collection of artifacts from Mesopotamia. This Greek temple. This is a marvelous, and then they have from the Parthenon in Athens. These are very controversial. The government of Greece would like to have these back. And this is something that I like to talk about with my students. Who really owns these magnificent works from the ancient world? Should it be in the hands of the British? Obviously, this means a lot of money for tourism in cities like London, but of course, the Greek government would love to have these back because Britain would say that we saved these, we salvaged these when Greece was really had very precarious government, and maybe they would have been destroyed if it weren't for a strong empire such as the British. So those are some questions to ponder as you look at these magnificent works of art at the British Museum.
Is it known how they took them?
Well, these are called the Elgin marbles, and it's named after Lord Elgin. Lord Elgin was a gentleman who was someone who was very interested in antiquities, and during a time when the Greek government in Greek had been, the Parthenon had been shelled and much of it had been destroyed. These were, according to Lord Elgin and the British government, they would say these were saved. These really would have been saved. And if it weren't for people such as Lord Elgin, today you have people like the actor George Clooney saying, yes, maybe there's some merit to what you're saying, but today Greece is obviously is an independent country, very stable, although economically they've had some lean times in recent years. But people will now say this is the time for the British government to give these magnificent artifacts back. It's probably easier said than done because, again, there are people literally from the world over will come to the British Museum, see these. The museum is free, but it clearly means a lot to tourism in England. So there's some tension there. There's a lot of tension going on with who quote unquote owns these magnificent works of art. These are some views of the National Gallery. There's a marvelous collection of European masters. I hope you pardon me if I believe that's a Botticelli. And this is a Da Vinci. So you don't have to go to Italy or the Louvre. The National Gallery in England, London, is a wonderful place to see some of the great European masters. This is a Vermeer. Vermeer was a wonderful Dutch painter. He only made about 30 some odd works of art in his entire career, and you can see some of them here in London. This, of course, needs no explanation. A superb Van Gogh collection. Monet. So we're going to pause there in London, and Nancy's going to pick it up from there, and she's going to take you into the continent.
So one of the things we do when we travel is we actually have started taking budget airlines in Europe from one point to another, and you can actually go on them for $35 a ticket. It does cost extra if you're putting luggage in their hold, which we usually are, but what we did is we took an EasyJet flight into Bordeaux. This is called the Dordogne region of France, and it's really beautiful. It's a storybook world of villages and prehistoric caves and a lot of small wineries, and we really couldn't wait to explore it. Our first stop was the village of Dome, And this is a photo of one of the museums there. And then we got to, with a car, we were really able to travel around to some of the neighboring villages. This is La Roque Guénac. It's right on the edge of a cliff. And this is Sarlat. This is the village where we stayed. And it was quite beautiful. Our accommodation was right there. And so we were able to look down into the park. And it was including breakfast. This is more of Sarlat. And walking around the town. Just really beautiful, and they're also famous for foie gras. And one of the things we did was we took a tour of some of the small villages there, and this one is at the edge of the river where people could travel by boat rides or rented canoes, and they could rent a canoe, just sort of glide lazily down the river, and then they'd pick them up on the other end, so you didn't have to come back, and we saw hundreds and hundreds of them. And this is the little town there. And some of the people photographing. And you can see the cliffs there. This is the Chateau de Baynac. And it's a storybook castle really perched high up on a cliff. And this is what it looked like up above. And then a view from the top. So again, a really superb view of the countryside. And looking down on the river. While we were there, the sunflowers were really in full bloom. And we could see all of the beautiful farmland there. This is Roque Saint-Christophe. It was a town that was built right into the ledges of a high cliff back in the Middle Ages to escape the invasion of the Vikings. And in the evenings, the views from it were just very peaceful, and we could hear the cicadas. None of the stone dwellings really remain there, but they had different placards that would show us what they felt it looked like long ago, and very steep steps. We heard some birds peeping, and so we looked around and we discovered these birds waiting for their mother to come back. We thought we had really seen the most scenic villages in the area, but there was one more, Saint-Cirque-la-Popie. And the approach to the village is really stunning. Their stone villages are built on different levels all the way up with the river down below. And in these next four photos, you can really appreciate the beauty of the village there. These photos show Sarlat at night, which really becomes alive. It's a very vibrant town. They have a lot of concerts there, just a lot of craftsmen showing things, and just a lot of cafes outside. A very pleasant place to walk around. One of the highlights of our trip was actually going to Lascaux, which is a prehistoric cave. And back in 1940, what happened is these boys were walking their dog, and the dog disappeared into a cave. And when they went inside with some candles, they discovered some prehistoric art. So over time, hundreds and hundreds of visitors came, and they suffered from a lot of damage from carbon dioxide and algae. So they have closed the original cave, but this is a replica of it. And they said the replica is to exact detail. And then they had the visitor center here. From Lascaux, we went to another cave called Grotte du Pêche-Merle. It actually was an authentic cave, but we weren't able to take any photographs inside, and the French government is considering closing it. But from Sarlat, we had a rented car, and we drove to Lyon, which David will now tell you about.
So one of the things we should mention, just to help you folks with some of the geography, I know I need help with geography. So Nancy, when we were in Sarlat, that's in a relatively inaccessible part of France. It's about 3 to 4 hour drive south of Paris. But it's, as you can see, I think by the pictures, it's a lovely area. So we then took a train. I don't know if we took a train or we flew, but we went to the eastern part of France, and this is Lyon. Lyon is considered the gourmet capital of France, and that's saying a lot for France. This is located fairly close to Italy. It's in the French Alps. It's the third biggest city in all of France. So the only cities that would be larger would be Paris and Marseille, which is in the southern part of the country. So Nancy has in her notes here, it took, we actually drove and it took under 4 hours. And we stayed right in the heart of the city. So this is a large city, but it has a lot of cultural attractions in addition to some gourmet attractions. Lyon lies at the junction of two of France's great rivers, one of which is the Rhone. Okay, this is right in downtown Lyon. We stayed right in the heart of the city at a very charming accommodation. This is the Opera House. This was literally within a stone's throw of where we stayed in downtown Lyon. It's very, very leafy green, very pretty area, very quiet area at night. There's a view. What's very popular is, of course, because it's at the junction of two major rivers, what's very popular in Lyon is taking boat rides during all hours of the day and night. That, of course, is what we actually visited the cathedral. It's perched up on a hill, and that's what's really smashing views. You'll get some views from there. And it was just great fun just watching the sunset. And one of the things that they do in Lyon that's very distinctive is the city takes great pride in how it illuminates these wonderful buildings. So at night, Lyon takes on a really interesting vibe. Or color, because they take time to illuminate many of the noteworthy buildings. So it's a very interesting city to walk around because much of it is, walk around at night because much of it is illuminated. And this gives you a sense of that right there. This, by the way, I failed to mention, this is the Basilica of Notre Dame. Here's some more nighttime views. As I mentioned before, Lyon has a really renowned reputation for fine cuisine. You can bust your budget going to Lyon and eating at Michelin-starred restaurants. That's a little bit too rich for our pockets, but we did enjoy walking around and just having a drink or a coffee. They also have some moderately priced restaurants as well, but they're very characteristic. Also has a very charming downtown area that's pedestrian only. So one of the real joys of going to Europe every summer is spending a lot of time in these pedestrian only areas where you don't have to worry about traffic. It's just people, tourists walking around, and locals as well. And there's a lot of these restaurants spill out onto the street. Again, this is the Notre Dame Basilica. Of course, now nighttime is turned into day. Some really lovely tile work there. Lyon also has, it's interesting for people such as myself interested in ancient history, the Romans did occupy Lyon, as they occupied, it seemed like, most of Europe at one point or another. And there's a very nice, the remains of a Roman amphitheater. And they actually still have performances there. It's a wonderful place just to sit out, enjoy the sun, and also just kind of contemplate history. Lyon is a very hilly city, so if you do go to Lyon, and I would highly recommend it, is you want to make sure you bring a comfortable pair of walking shoes. It's a city of hills, and that can be very challenging, especially on a warm day. It's another one of their churches. And the interior of that church. It's a medieval clock, very decorative, very elaborate. We very much enjoyed walking around Lyon's Old Town, and as you can see, it does have a very vibrant touristic aspect to it. Lyon is also famous for its puppet shows. So you could actually go to a museum that deals exclusively for the history of puppets, puppetry, puppet making. This is, again, as we cross. What's very popular in Europe these days is having these pedestrian areas where they'll have fountains or just a way of people cooling off, or kids having fun. And these kids I just captured these kids frolicking on this walkway. Lyon has a very nice museum of fine arts. So again, it's a city of culture, a city of fine cuisine. And Nancy and I, we derive great pleasure of touring the various museums of art. So Nancy now, I believe, is going to take you from Lyon into a new country.
Yeah. So what we did is, again, we took a Ryanair or EasyJet, and we took it right into Milan so that we could take a bus to Bellagio in the Lake Como area. So when we arrived, we actually took a boat, a short ferry ride from Verona to our town where we stayed, which was Bellagio. We really love the ferries of Lake Como because they really range from modern hydrofoils to very old world boats, and then they stop along the way at each of the different villages. And this is our favorite boat of all, just very, very old world. And this shows some of the ferries, which stop at all of the ports along the lake at different times throughout the day. Our hotel in Bellagio is called Hotel Metropole. It's very old world style, but it has all the conveniences of the modern world, such as air conditioning. Our room was on the second floor, and it really had stunning views over the water. And from our room, we could see the car ferry arriving, so people would come from Como, the town across the lake, and bring their cars. It's very inexpensive to ride the ferry, and it's a great way to get around the lake. Bellagio is really our favorite town there because it's not particularly large, but it has a fun vibe to it. There's arcades, shaded arcades with shops and cafes, and narrow alleyways with steep steps. And this shows some of them up to the upper part of the town. There's little cafes tucked into tiny alcoves, and entertainment at night in many of them. Just down the lake from our hotel was Villa Mezzi, and it was built by the Vice President of the Italian Republic back in 1800s and was used and is still used as a summer residence today. The villa was so pretty to walk through just with, let me get rid of this, different cypress trees and palm trees and fish ponds. And then we took a day trip down the lake by ferry to a palace on the lake, and this shows some of the stops along the way. This is Villa de Balbianello, and the most recent owner had no children at all. So when he died, he left the villa to Italy. And the views out over the lake were stunning. The day that we visited there at the villa, they were actually preparing for a wedding. And it looked like it was going to be a beautiful place to get married. Since the weather was really beautiful when we were there, we decided to actually go to Switzerland. And you can take a bus across, or a ferry across the lake, about 15 minutes, and then a bus, which was about a half an hour, to Lake Lugano in Switzerland. The old town, Lugano, was a very pleasant place to stroll around. And it had many old world cafes and outdoor markets. They had many shaded promenades which sold with stores such as Gucci and Rolex and Prada. It was just a great place for a day trip, and we were surprised that Switzerland was really that close. And it shows some of the steep walks there. And down by the waterfront, people were playing games, and they were renting these really cute paddle boats that were very retro. And we enjoyed just sitting at the edge of the water. Switzerland is more expensive than Italy, but it was a great place for a day trip. So we really highly recommend Lake Como as a place to visit. It's one of our favorite places in Italy. So our last stop is Milan, and David's going to talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, Nan. So I think when we think of Milan, I think a lot of people think of business, and it's true. It's Italy's business capital, far and away. It's a very important city in terms of. Oh, excuse me.
Sorry about that.
But Italy, this is, I think, Milan sees a lot of tourism, but I think for a lot of Americans, it doesn't quite capture their image of what Italy should look like. But I think Nancy and I have developed quite a fondness for Milan because it has some very significant cultural attractions that are very important. And we find that the city is very culturally alive, and also it's also within close proximity of Lake Como as well. So it makes a great place to spend maybe your first few days in Italy, then go to Lake Como or vice versa. So Milan, we stayed at a hotel which is pretty much right where you see this picture. That's Milan's Duomo that you see in the background, and it's situated right in the downtown part of the city. Okay. Milan, as I mentioned, is the business capital of Italy, and this kind of gives you a hint of this. There's a really interesting mix. One thing I like about traveling to Milan is you have some very interesting old architecture competing with some very futuristic modern architecture. And it's really the lifeline of Italy's economy. This is Milan's Duomo. This is, I believe, if memory serves, one of the 3 largest Gothic cathedrals in the world. Believe it or not, it took 600 years to finish this building. They started it in around the 13th century, early 13th century. They didn't finish it until the 19th century. Every time in Italy that a project takes too long to build or goes over budget, people refer to it as a Duomo, as a reference to this structure here. It is really, though, a magnificent building. It's kind of a mismatch of styles, architecturally speaking, but it's really it's a must visit if you're in Milan. One of the joys of visiting Milan's Duomo is that you can actually go to the top and you can tour the top of the building, and with some really stunning views of the countryside. You can even on a clear day see as distant as the Alps from this structure. Just getting into the Duomo can be a challenge. I know Nancy and I spent one trip to Milan, and we tried to strategize going early in the day or later in the day, and we still couldn't get tickets to get in. We were able to tour the top of the building, which was great fun, but at the same time, just getting into the building to tour the interior of the Duomo was very challenging. On the left-hand side of this picture is one of the earliest indoor malls ever created, the Victoria Emmanuel Mall. We enjoy this. I think we'll have some pictures of the inside of this. That was built in the 19th century, and it's really a very impressive piece of architecture that's adjacent to the Duomo. What's fun about the mall when we bring you inside here is you can walk through here during all hours. It's open 24/7, even though the shops are not open all night. But it's wonderful to walk through. It's very atmospheric. It's another view of downtown Milan. This building right here today, it has sort of mixed history. It actually was today it's a modern art museum, a very impressive one, but it also was a place where Mussolini gave speeches in the 1920s and 30s before his regime ended in a very violent and abrupt way. So he would have given speeches from this building in the shadow of the Duomo. And this is the interior of the Modern Art Museum. It's a very impressive building with a very interesting conceptual style. They had a special exhibit on John F. Kennedy that was quite intriguing, and also has some very interesting art display as well. Here's the views of the Duomo from the Modern Art Museum, and looking at down into the mall. This is the interior of the mall that I spoke of a moment ago. Has a very captivating, a lot of glass, a lot of natural light, some very upscale shops. Also, you'll pay dearly if you want to have a cappuccino at one of those cafes as you walk through there. But it's nice to fantasize. One of the fun traditions they have in the mall is the bull that you see there. That represents the province of Torino, which is not far. Milan is in Lombardy, and Torino is borders. And this is the bull that represents Torino. And they have a tradition there. If you spin around on the bull's testicles, it will bring you good luck. And if you look, I don't know if you can see, but it's been trod upon so often that it's worn down literally inches. But the tourists have great fun spinning around. Some of them get a little bit too dizzy, especially if they've had a few drinks. Be a little bit, but you could see the hole in the floor. So it actually is a very charming tradition. And Nancy and I couldn't help but do it. It also makes a great photo opportunity. The only thing that was a little frustrating is sometimes you'll have a tourist. There was a woman there, and she must have spent probably 10 minutes just spinning around and around. And I guess her husband couldn't get just the right shot. And it was much to the chagrin of some of these families. You're looking a little frustrated. The other thing I enjoy about walking through the mall is it's a great place to people watch. It's a lot of fun to people watch. And Milan is a very popular touristic city. It truly is. And these are just some shots that I I got walking through. There's also some marvelous, some really lovely museums. This museum was a museum that was dedicated to a particular family, that a family of note that was now is in the hands of the government, and they've retained everything as it looked about 100 years ago, with some beautiful artworks. And I derive a great deal of enjoyment going to these houses that capture a period in history. And you get a sense of what life was like, maybe for an upscale family living in the turn of the 20th century in Milan. And these are artwork that was on display, held in this particular home. Milan also has some of the oldest churches literally in the world, the Christian world. So even though it's a city of business, you have churches that date back to the 5th century AD. It's one of the earliest Christian churches, when Christianity was just, Rome had fallen and Christianity was sort of still struggling to get a foothold in the continent. But some of this artwork that you'll see here on this stonework is literally 1,500 years old. Some frescoes that are very faded, but still greatly appreciated and admired. It's the interior of one of the churches in Milan. So Milan, one of the people that worked at a little convenience store in Milan, I thought captured the city really well. He said, when you compare it to Rome, it doesn't have the cultural, artistic riches that Rome does in terms of extensiveness, but it's a city that really warrants seeking out. You really need to seek out these cultural treasures, and it's really worth seeking out, as we've been able to do. We've been there now a couple times. One can't miss, if you do go to Milan, and again, we would highly recommend it, is you'll want to go to see Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. The Last Supper is one of the great cultural attractions in Europe. You do have to have reservations to visit, to see the Last Supper. This building, by the way, was bombed during the Second World War. It did suffer some significant damage, but some people believe miraculously that the painting itself did not suffer significant damage. But you can get tickets rather easily online by reserving tickets. And what I found interesting is they only allow you, when you go in there, it's very much highly regulated. You can only spend 15 minutes admiring the artwork, and I thought it would be interesting to get a shot of, as soon as the tourists walked in our group, everyone wanted to take out their phones and their cameras. This is a very controversial painting because when Leonardo da Vinci created this, he experimented with certain painting techniques. It didn't quite work, but so it has undergone many, many restorations. Art historians and art critics have been critical of some of the restorations, but this one, the most recent one, I think many people now consider this to really try to recapture his intent and the original glory in colors contained in his artwork. And as you can see, this is 500 years old, but his experimental technique didn't quite hold the way he wanted it to, but it still remains one of the most noteworthy artworks in the Western world. This is an area called Navigli. It's an area in Milan where it's becoming increasingly, it used to be very derelict, an area where you wouldn't want to venture at night, but it's become now much more touristic because you're having eateries, different places, shops and what have you. It's become a very popular place for tourists and Milanese people to visit during the evening, to stroll, to people watch, and enjoy the canals.